to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to the 1-year anniversary episode of Two Roads Crossing. My name is Dr. Barry Schwenk. I am a pastor, a veterinarian, and your host as we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. And I'm wearing this hat. If you're just listening, I'm wearing our family's birthday top hat to celebrate the 1-year episode of Two Roads Crossing. Can't believe when we started this time last year that this would be such a positive thing. Very encouraged. I don't know that I can continue to wear this hat because it makes my head itch. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we are on episode number 52 of Two Roads Crossing, and part of our celebration today. Hopefully you were able to participate in our podcast survey. For the last month or so, we had a survey monkey that was out. There was an email that was sent out. There were various ways through social media for you to connect and provide a little bit of feedback. This podcast initiative is meant to be an encouragement to you. It's supposed to be something that would help you grow in your faith and in your profession and in your life. And so we want to hear from you. We want to know what it is that we can do better. And leading up to this 1-year anniversary, felt like that was a great time to ask those questions. Up until now, we've been doing a lot of trial and error. And so thank you for your patience. And we certainly appreciate your feedback. As of today, I think that we are currently at, I believe, like 450 subscribers. Unfortunately, if you're listening through the CVM app, there's no way for us. We can track the number of people, the number of times that the podcasts are played and listened to, but we don't know how many people are connecting through the app. So we imagine that there are far more people out there that are listening to this than even what our metrics actually tell us. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you who have continued to tune in and give us your time, but also hopefully this has been a blessing to you. Now, as part of the survey, we asked if you'd be willing to give us some feedback, and you'd be willing to share your name and email address with us, that there would be a drawing today. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do right now. Let me see if I can share my screen, because there's a wonderful website called Wheel of Names. And in case the name isn't enough for you to know how this works, this is a random wheel, just like that you can spin, and you can select things. So I have entered in. There are 43 folks who felt comfortable enough with attaching their name and email address to the survey. And if you're watching, you can look over here on the right-hand side. I've entered all 43 of those names onto our wheel, and I'm going to shuffle. And just because I have a little bit of OCD, I'm going to shuffle 2 more times. And so now the wheel is thoroughly randomized, and we're going to spin, and we're going to select 3 winners today. You will be receiving an email from us in order to get your contact information, because there are 3 prizes for 3 different people. You have a lovely Two Roads Crossing coffee mug, a Two Roads Crossing pen, and a Two Roads Crossing charging pack for one of your electronic devices. So here we go. With no further ado, let's spin the wheel. I don't know if you'll be able to hear that. It's a lovely wheel spinning noise. And I think our first winner is Mary. Congratulations. I will be sending you an email soon. And we're going to remove your name so that way you can't win more than once. And then we're going to shuffle again. And then we're going to spin again. The wheel on the computer goes round and round. Kathy A. Congratulations. Congratulations to Mary and to Kathy. And then let's remove that name. And we're going to shuffle one more time and spin that wheel. Jamie P. So thank you very much to all three of you. Congratulations, and thank you to everyone who has contributed to this survey. It will certainly help us. Although I do find it a little bit interesting. I don't know if you ask for a lot of feedback, but whenever you do, it can be a little bit confusing because we have feedback on the survey that asks for longer podcast episodes. That's a great piece of feedback. And I also have people who have asked for shorter podcast episodes. We have people who would like to hear more personal stories and people that want to hear less personal stories. And so it's always hard when you ask for advice, because there's such a wide range of people that are participating and listening to this podcast. We're going to do our very best as we go through to look at some of those trends and to see if there are things. There are lots of good pieces of advice in there, some conflicting that we'll have to weigh and see what we can do to try to accommodate as many of you as possible. But it's always hard. It's always hard to know exactly where you go. And if you're anything like me, this process kind of brought up just a much larger topic, which is understanding as a Christian veterinarian, trying to understand exactly how you know where you're supposed to go. Uh, you get these conflicting pieces of advice from lots of different people, and then you have to make a decision about it. And the question is, how do you know what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it? And it really boils down to our ability as followers of Christ to be able to discern God's will. And it's a really big topic, and it's something that I think all of us struggle with at some point in time or another. One of the pieces of information that was really helpful for me as I approach things like this was a series of devotions that was done by Dr. Wendell Cantrell, who had been a previous long-term field worker for CVM in Kenya. He helped to develop the student model of ministry here in the United States. He's been connected to CVM for a very long time. I remember sharing a room with him once in Vegas as a region rep. And I remember going after a long day in the exhibit hall. I remember walking back to the room, and he said, "You know what my favorite part of the day is on these types of trips?" And I said, "No, what is that?" He said, "Going back to the room and just sitting in silence." And I wasn't really sure how to take that. Whether it was just that he had expended all of his social capital during the day, or maybe he just thought that I talked a lot. But either way, I absolutely love Dr. Cantrell. And this he did a series of devotions based on a book by Kevin DeYoung, and the book was called "Just Do Something," and it gave a reasonably easy working model of how to understand God's will. And he broke it down into three sections. And the first was God's will of decree. And this is the part of God's will, kind of like the Charlton Heston Ten Commandments movie. I don't know if you saw that. Pharaoh would say, "As it is written, so shall it be done." There's a part of God's will that He has set in place. He has determined it is His plan that cannot be changed. It cannot be thwarted. When you look at Scripture, there are lots of examples of this, right? God's plan for the deliverance of Israel by Moses, for example, was a great way. God's plan was for Israel to be delivered out of Egypt. He sent a deliverer, and what had the Pharaoh done? Pharaoh had commanded that all of the male children in Israel would be killed, and yet God's plan still came to fruition. Same thing happened when Christ was born. Herod tried to do exactly the same thing. God's will of decree cannot be changed. And it was really helpful for me to think about it in that way, because I spent a lot of time in my life not doing things or doing things, um, concerned about whether I was going to mess up God's plans. And maybe that's part of the type A personality, but we can get to the point where we want to do the perfect thing because we think that we have the authority or even the power to mess up God's plans, whether it's for our lives or for the lives of people around us. And that helped to kind of alleviate a little bit of that pressure. And it really came to light. I don't think I've shared this story with you on the podcast before, but as a veterinary student, I had gone back to East Africa. My family had been missionaries in Zaire at that time, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I had gone back to visit, and then I was going to connect with a CVM short-term mission in Kenya. And the plan was is that we drove trucks overland from Nairobi into Bukavu, and then the missionaries were going to drive me into Rwanda, into Kigali, for me to fly back to Kenya to meet up the mission team. But unfortunately, when we got to the border, they wouldn't allow the vehicles through, and the missionaries just dropped me off at the border and they left. And so there I was as a 20-something-year-old vet student, standing on the border between Congo and Rwanda, having to find my way back to Kigali in time to make this flight. And I ended up on this small matatu, a little tiny van type bus, just cram packed with people and chickens and luggage. My feet were on a spare tire, so my knees were were pressed up against me, and it was hot, windy roads in the middle of nowhere in Rwanda. And partway through there was a woman sitting next to me. She had two children on her lap, and one of the children started to get nauseous and got sick because the windows, of course, didn't roll down. And so that was all happening next to me. And while she was trying to take care of that, I took her youngest, her son, put him on my lap, um, so that way she could take care of her daughter. And her son fell asleep. And we were in the middle of nowhere when our matatu got pulled over at a non-official road check, and this was in the 90s, shortly after the genocide had happened in Rwanda, and there were a group of armed men who made us all get out of the matatu, and they were looking for members of the other tribal group that had helped cause this genocide. And I talked with the soldiers for a while. They thought it was rather odd that I was holding, this young boy, who just slept through through all of this, climbing in and out of the matatu, and um, they were checking everyone's papers. They found it rather strange that here was this Mzungu in this matatu in the middle of nowhere, and that curiosity was enough to get everyone back into the matatu and on our way. And it was about that when we got back into the van, the woman was visibly shaken, um, and when her son woke up, realized that she was in a mixed marriage, and her son resembled her husband, who was part of that tribal group that was being hunted down at that point in time. And the presence, she was so thankful because I was there and I was holding her son, um, that her son had not been taken away from her. And we actually, as we got to Kigali, realized that she was taking him to an underground, um, orphanage where she could leave him and be for him to be safe and to be protected, and spent a couple of days there helping out at that orphanage. But I got reflecting on that, thinking about what would have happened if I wouldn't have been in that van. And I got thinking about all the series of events that led up to me even being there to begin with. This My ability to go on this short-term mission trip was predicated by me doing some failing some things at school that gave me a little bit more time to spend thinking about my actions. And even being on that bus was a failure because I was supposed to be driven to Kigali, and here I am in this matatu trying to find my way. And there was this whole series of events that I thought were setbacks, things that were problems, things that were even failures on my part that led me to that point. And my mere presence being in that van was enough maybe to protect this young boy. And as that realization hit me, it was like a wave that I also realized that even if I had not been in that van, that boy still would have been protected. That there are these things that no matter whether you think that the right thing is happening or the wrong thing is happening, God's plan can't be changed. Our days on this earth are numbered, and only God controls that. And God had allowed me through those series of unfortunate events to be in the place for me to see His will of decree acted out. That whether I was there, my presence meant nothing. It was his presence, and he allowed me to see his presence at work doing something bigger than I possibly could have imagined. And when we think about God's will, we have to stop taking um, that kind of prideful look at it, that somehow we can change what God has ordained, what God has said will happen will happen. Um, if we act according to his will, we get to experience it and we get to see it firsthand. But even at our very best, if we were trying to prevent God's will from coming to pass, nothing will change because God's will be done. The second part that Kevin DeYoung describes in his book, the second part of God's will is his will of desire, and this is the way that God's intention for your life. When we think about what we should do, a lot of that should be rooted in God's will of desire. It's the idea that God intends for you to live a certain way. He intends for you to love the way that he loves. He intends for you to forgive the way that he forgives. He intends for the fruit of the Spirit to come up, to not just to be within your heart, but for it to come to overflowing. I like to describe it. If you grew up in Indiana, there's a certain time of year where bushels and bushels of zucchini would show up at the back of the church, right? That's what spiritual fruit's like. It's not just for you to keep, but it should come to a point of overflowing in your life that it's there to share with absolutely everyone. And when we start thinking about God's will and the decisions that we have to make, we have to ask this question: will this decision impact the way that the fruit of the Spirit comes to bear in my life? Will it have an impact in the way that I love, the way that I forgive? Will it impact my spiritual growth? Early in my married life, I was working at an emergency hospital, and in the beginning, I was working a couple of nights during the week, but eventually, as I gained more experience, they shifted me over to the weekends just because it seemed to be a lot busier. And honestly, the money was a lot better working on Sundays. I could work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Sundays. And just the amount of money that I could make was great. And for my family, I was in this position where I knew that I could do right by my family. I could provide for my family by working on a Sunday. Well, working on a Sunday, there's nothing wrong with working on a Sunday, but the problem is that at that point in my life, Sunday was my primary source of spiritual nourishment. And when I wasn't getting nourished spiritually because I was working on Sunday and I wasn't getting it anywhere else during the week, my ability to bear spiritual fruit began to decrease. My abilities as a husband and a father began to decrease. We had more problems, um, and when I think about that time in our lives, I reflect back on just even that attitude that I was the one that was providing for my family. Uh, did I believe that when Jesus said, "If you seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, that all these things will be provided"? If I really believed that, did I trust him with that? Because working on a Sunday was impeding my spiritual growth and my ability to live as God intended and desired in my life. And oddly enough, once I made that switch and I stopped working on a Sunday. I went back to working during the week. Everything was provided. I still had the same amount. I don't know. I can't explain it, but God just provided in places where He wanted me to be. God provided. And when we think about decisions that we have to make, uh, we have to ask that question: the things that I'm choosing between, the decisions that I'm making, which ones will impact my ability to grow spiritually? Which things will not impede spiritual fruit but fertilize it? What will allow me to live as God intended? And for some, working on a Sunday will be fine because there are other places that God has brought you during the week that helps you with all of those things. But for some of us, maybe it's not, and we have to get past that in our decision making, that we're not the ones. It shouldn't be according to our will and our ideas, but rather His will. And when it comes to God's will of desire, what He wants is for us to draw closer to Christ and for us to be more like Him. And that means in every decision that we make, that has to be the primary motive. The primary motive is, will this help me be more like Jesus? Because if it is, then that's the choice that I have to make. There's no other pro and con list that we have to worry about drawing up. That is the sum total of where we need to be. But sometimes when you look at decisions, right? When you look at decisions to be made, and you look at God's will of desire, there may be some equality there. And Kevin DeYoung describes this third part of God's will as His will of direction. This is the place that God wants to lead you. God's will of desire is the same for everyone. His will of decree is the same for everyone, but God's will of direction is individually tailored to where He wants to lead you and guide you. It will never be away from His will of desire. It will never be away from His will of decree. It will always be built upon that foundation, but then He will direct you in some of the specifics of your life. It's important for us to think that um, we want to be able to make these decisions that are perfect. And sometimes we get paralyzed in making a decision because we don't have that sense of absolute confirmation. When we approach God's will of direction in our lives, it needs to be bathed in prayer. We need to be experiencing God's peace as we make these decisions. But Kevin DeYoung says, when all of those things are equal, God also allows us to choose. So is it more godly for you to be an accountant or a veterinarian or a parking lot attendant? Well, if the opportunity to grow in Christ is equal across the board, then you have your gifts and your talents, you have your natural passions, the things that God has instilled in you that may guide you and direct you in a particular direction. But ultimately, God doesn't want that direction to become an idol. See, what we need to be aware of is that as long as we're in His will of decree and His will of desire, that direction may change from time to time. And we need to be content and satisfied with where He leads and guides us. And so, is it possible that you can make a wrong decision? Yeah, absolutely. But what's the worst that happens? The worst that happens is that God leads you in a new direction. You may one day be known as that parking lot attendant that used to be an accountant, or an accountant that used to be a parking lot attendant. And overall, God will use those lessons as long as the motive of your heart has been to please Him, to serve Him, and to worship Him according to His will of desire. Any of those other things can be corrected, can be changed. And to be honest, as long as we continue to pursue Him, as long as we're growing and changing, God will do what is necessary in His will of direction in our lives to get us to that place where we are more like Christ, where we are drawing closer to Him. Sometimes that means taking away things that become idols. Thinking about Palm Sunday, I love at the end of the triumphal entry that Jesus goes to the temple and he starts flipping over tables. Why? Because uh, his house was to be a house of prayer, not a den of thieves. And it wasn't that they were buying and selling, but rather that became the motive. Could those things have been done in a God honoring way, in a way of honesty? Yes, absolutely. But it became the new motive. And so, what did Jesus do? Jesus went in and flipped some tables. And in my life, I have had more than one table flipped over because even something that had started off as something good, a good direction that was supposed to help me in God's will of desire in my life. um, it changed over time, and the action became the motive. And God had to flip over those tables in my lives so that I would let go of those things and focus more on him. See, that's really at the root of it when we think about, even for this podcast, when I think about all the things that we're going to have to talk about from this survey. Ultimately, what we want to ask when we think about the direction that God's taking us is, how are we able to walk according to God's will of desire? Are we being God honoring? The podcast can't be the end result, but rather may just be part of the journey that we are on as an organization, as we are on together collectively as Christian veterinarians. Hopefully, we never forget that we are Christians that are veterinarians, not veterinarians that are Christians. It has to be about Christ first and foremost. And I think over the years, as I have um, reflected on those words from Dr. Cantrell in those moments of silence that he's also encouraged me to utilize, and I think I've done a little bit of a better job with that over the years. As I think about it, when I come face to face with hard decisions, places where I've had to make transitions within my life, professionally, relationally, it's really been helpful for me to understand that ultimately the power of will is in God's hands. And if I can rest in his will, and if I can pursue his will of desire, if I can pursue the spiritual growth that makes me look more and more like Christ, then those decisions of direction become far easier. I had, when we were on deputation, I had one veterinarian approach me and say, it's just wonderful that you're getting to go and have this adventure in Ethiopia. He said, I really wish that I had no responsibilities like you so that I could do something like this too. And I remember the first feeling was I was a little bit insulted. But then as I reflected on it in those moments of silence again, I realized that there's this attitude that we oftentimes carry that it's about our will and that the world that we're responsible more than what God actually is, and that we build ourselves up in this place of in these towers of pride, and our decisions are based upon what we can do and what we can contribute, not what God desires for us and the direction that He's leading us in. That's really humbling because, for me over the years, that has uh, my desire to practice veterinary medicine has been impacted and changed. My desire and my ability to be a father and a husband and even a pastor has changed over time, but it's understanding God's desire for my life and his intention that has helped me to navigate through each and every one of those steps. And so I hope, even just sharing a little bit about this, I know it kind of came to mind as I was thinking about this survey. And again, thank you so much to all of you who have continued to listen on a regular basis, to all of you who have subscribed, to all of you who have provided feedback for us to help us better serve you, to help us uh, give us a better direction of where we're going. Um, even in this, and that pause for me to reflect, I think on God's will has been an important one, and hopefully this gives you some tools to be able to make decisions of your own. Hopefully it'll alleviate a little bit of that stress, feeling like you might be carrying the world on your shoulders, that God's shoulders are much bigger, and that ultimately, when it comes down to it, making decisions has everything to do with just being able to grow in your walk with the Lord. See, trying to discern God's will in my life has made me who I am. It's led me even to this very point in time for this very specific purpose, which is to encourage you, in your profession, in your life, and in your spiritual walk. Learning to accept God's will in my life has led me to be who I am. And my name is Dr. Barry Schwenk. I'm a pastor, a veterinarian, and the host of this podcast, where together we learn how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you are blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.